I live in Texas, where the summers feel endless and the air hums with heat that seems to seep into your bones and settle there. I used to love those long golden evenings when the cicadas sang their ancient song and the smell of barbecue drifted through the neighborhood on invisible currents. Back then, my life was simple in the way that only looks simple from a distance. I was a single mom doing my best to raise my daughter Emily in a little house on the edge of town, a modest place with chipping paint on the shutters and a yard that always needed mowing. But it was ours. She was my heart, my reason for everything, the light that got me out of bed every morning. I thought we were happy, even after the divorce. I thought we'd found our rhythm, our new normal. But I was wrong, so terribly, devastatingly wrong. Every weekend, my daughter fell ill, and eventually, I found out what her father did. It started so quietly that I almost didn't notice it at first. The signs were subtle, easy to dismiss as coincidence or bad luck. One Friday afternoon, Emily was her usual bright self, running around the house with her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand and her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, excited to spend the weekend with her dad. She loved those weekends initially. She'd pack her favorite pajamas, choose which books to bring, and chatter endlessly about what they might do together. When she came home Sunday night, though, everything had changed. She was pale and quiet, moving slowly like every step took enormous effort. She had a low fever that made her cheeks flush, and she said her stomach hurt in that vague, childlike way that could mean anything. I thought it was just a bug, maybe something she'd picked up from another kid. Kids get sick, right? That's what everyone says. I gave her some children's acetaminophen, let her rest on the couch with her favorite blanket, and by Monday morning she was fine, not completely back to normal, but well enough to go to school. But the next weekend, it happened again. And again the weekend after that. And the one after that. It became so predictable that I started marking it in my planner with little symbols only I understood. Friday, drop off, a small circle. Sunday, sick, a dark X. Monday, recovery, a half circle. Tuesday, fine, nothing at all. It was like watching a cruel pattern unfold in real time, a nightmare on repeat. And no matter what I did, no matter how many vitamins I gave her or how carefully I monitored her health during the week, I couldn't stop it. The cycle continued with mechanical precision, as if programmed by some invisible force. I remember sitting by her bed one night in late spring, the curtains moving gently in the warm breeze, watching her small chest rise and fall in the dim glow of her nightlight. Her forehead was damp with sweat despite the air conditioning running full blast. I brushed her honey-colored hair away from her face, tucking it behind her ear the way she liked, and whispered promises to myself that I would figure out what was happening. I didn't care how long it took or what I had to do. I would find the answer. She was only 8 years old, her whole life ahead of her, and already her body was trapped in this strange, exhausting cycle that nobody seemed able to explain. At first, I thought it had to be something physical, something in the environment, something she was exposed to only at his house. Maybe she was allergic to something at her dad's place. Mark lived about 40 minutes away in a rental house that used to be part of an old cattle ranch. The house itself was probably built in the 70s with that distinctive wood paneling inside and shag carpet that had seen better days. It had a big yard full of tall grass that Mark never seemed to get around to mowing, and a few stray cats that came and went, leaving little paw prints on the dusty porch. Maybe it was mold growing in the walls or under the floorboards. Maybe the water was contaminated by old pipes or agricultural runoff from nearby fields. I called the pediatrician, a kind woman named Dr. Martinez, who had been seeing Emily since she was a baby, and told her everything I'd been observing. She listened patiently, taking notes, and ran every test she could think of: blood work for allergies, cultures for infections, panels for bacteria, even a few autoimmune tests that required Emily to fast beforehand, which made her cranky and confused. All of them came back normal, completely frustratingly normal. I remember sitting in that bright white examination room with the hum of the air conditioner drowning out my thoughts, staring at the alphabet poster on the wall, while Dr. Martinez gave me that polite but tired smile that doctors give when they've run out of medical explanations. She said Emily was healthy, that all her levels were exactly where they should be for a girl her age. She suggested that maybe the changes between houses were just stressful for Emily, that children are more sensitive to disruption than we realize. Kids, she said, folding her hands on her desk, can show stress through physical symptoms. It's called psychosomatic illness, she explained, and it doesn't mean the pain isn't real. It just means the cause is emotional rather than physical. But deep down, in a place I couldn't quite name, I knew that wasn't it. This wasn't stress. This was something else entirely. Mark and I had been divorced for 3 years by then. We'd met in college at the University of Houston, both of us young and stupid, and convinced we'd figured out life before we'd even started living it. We married young, right after graduation, in a small ceremony that his parents paid for. By the time Emily was born 2 years later, we were already drifting apart like two boats that had lost sight of the shore. He was charming when he wanted to be funny, attentive, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and make everyone like him within minutes. But behind closed doors, when it was just the two of us, there was a coldness to him that I'd tried to ignore for years. He liked control over the finances, over our social calendar, over what I cooked for dinner, even over how I arranged the furniture. Every decision had to run through him first. If I bought something without asking, even groceries, he'd question why I chose that brand or whether we really needed it. It felt like living under a microscope, with someone constantly adjusting the focus. When we divorced, he made sure everyone saw him as the calm, rational one who'd tried to save the marriage, and me as the emotional, unstable one who'd given up. He played the part so well that even my parents took his side half the time, calling me dramatic when I tried to explain how suffocating the marriage had been. He'd tell them I was exaggerating, that I'd always been too sensitive, and they believed him because he'd spent years building that narrative. When the court granted shared custody, I told myself I could live with it. For Emily's sake, I could be civil, could co-parent effectively. He loved Emily, or at least I thought he did. He was a good dad in public, always showing up with big gestures that made him look generous balloons on her birthday, expensive toys she didn't ask for, weekend trips to places with good photo opportunities. But I started to notice that those gestures came with strings attached, invisible threads that tugged and pulled. He wanted her to love him more than me. He competed with me in ways that only made sense later, when I finally understood what he was doing. At first, when the sickness started, it didn't fit into that pattern. I thought it was something he couldn't help, something about his house or his lifestyle that was inadvertently making her ill. But as the weekends went on, and as Emily's symptoms got stranger and more varied, I began to realize the truth might be much darker than I'd imagined. Every Sunday night she came home tired, her eyes glassy like she'd been staring at something far away for too long. Sometimes she was trembling, her hands shaking when she tried to hold her fork at dinner. Once, she had a rash on her neck that looked like small burns, raised and red and painful to touch. Another time, her breath smelled metallic, like coins or blood, sharp and chemical. When I asked what she'd eaten that weekend, trying to track down the source, she could never remember clearly. The details were always fuzzy, frustratingly vague. She'd say things like, "I think we had soup," or maybe burgers. But when I pressed for specifics, what kind of soup, what did it taste like, what color was it, she'd just shrug and say she didn't know. The most terrifying part was how quickly she got better after she came home. Within a day or two, the color would return to her cheeks, the sparkle to her eyes, the energy to her step. By Wednesday, she'd be laughing again, running around the house, drawing pictures, singing songs from her favorite movies. It was as if the sickness lived only at his house, as if crossing back over our threshold somehow broke whatever spell had been cast on her. I need you to listen to my story carefully and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong in what I did next. Because the decision I made to expose him didn't just protect my daughter, it shattered what little was left of our extended family. My parents stopped speaking to me for months, refusing to answer my calls or respond to my texts. My sister called me cruel, accused me of destroying a man's life out of spite. And Mark made sure everyone in our social circle saw me as the villain, the crazy ex-wife who couldn't let go, who had to fabricate lies to get attention. But before all that, before the police and the lawyers and the courtroom drama, there were months of doubt. Long, terrible months of confusion and fear, of second-guessing myself, of wondering if I was losing my mind. I remember one night sitting at the kitchen table after Emily had gone to bed, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I was flipping through my notes, pages and pages of observations I'd been keeping. I had started keeping a small spiral notebook, the kind with a blue cover that you can buy at any drugstore, and I wrote down everything. What time she left for Mark's house, what time she got back, what she was wearing, what she said she ate, every symptom, no matter how minor, every tiny detail I could capture. It made me feel like I was doing something productive, like I had some control over the situation, even though nothing made sense and every answer led to more questions. Then one Sunday in early June, she came home with bruises on her legs, dark purple marks the size of thumbprints scattered across her shins and thighs. There was also a faint chemical smell on her clothes, something I couldn't quite place. It was sharp and almost bitter, like cleaning fluid or paint thinner, definitely not a normal smell for a child's clothing. I asked Mark about it when he dropped her off, trying to sound casual and not accusatory. He said she'd fallen off her bike, that she was clumsy that way, always getting scrapes and bruises. But Emily didn't have a bike at his house. I knew this for a fact because I had offered to buy one several months ago so she'd have one at each place, and he'd refused, saying it was unnecessary, that they didn't need duplicate toys. That lie, small as it seemed, lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. I started doing something that I know sounds strange, maybe even paranoid, but I needed to find answers anywhere I could. I started sniffing her laundry when she came home, holding her little t-shirts and jeans up to my nose like some kind of detective looking for clues. Sometimes her clothes smelled like smoke, not cigarette smoke, but something heavier, more industrial, like a bonfire or burning plastic. Sometimes they smelled like gasoline, sharp and unmistakable. Sometimes like acetone, that distinctive nail polish remover scent. And sometimes like nothing at all, which was almost more unsettling because it meant the other times weren't my imagination. I talked to my mom about it one evening, calling her after Emily was asleep, hoping for reassurance or maybe validation that I wasn't crazy. But she just sighed in that way mothers do when they think you're being difficult. "Honey," she said, her voice tired, "maybe she's just adjusting. Divorce is hard on kids. You've always been so protective of her, maybe a little too protective. Kids are resilient. She'll be fine." My parents loved Mark. They thought he was the responsible one, the steady one who had a good job and paid his bills on time. They thought I was the one who'd given up on the marriage too soon, who hadn't tried hard enough to make it work. Hearing them defend him, hearing them suggest that this was somehow my fault for being too protective, cut deep. It felt like betrayal. Even my friends didn't fully understand when I tried to talk to them about it. They meant well, I know they did, but their responses felt hollow. They told me I was probably overanalyzing things, reading too much into normal childhood illnesses. "Kids get sick," they said. "Kids get mysterious rashes and upset stomachs. Maybe you're just under a lot of stress yourself. Maybe you're projecting." Their words, though kind in intention, made me feel more isolated than if they'd said nothing at all. So I stopped talking about it. I stopped reaching out. I started carrying the fear alone, letting it sit heavy in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. Then came the weekend that changed everything, the turning point that made denial impossible. Emily came home on a Sunday evening in mid-July, and she was barely conscious. I knew something was wrong the moment Mark's truck pulled up. She wasn't moving in the passenger seat, just slumped against the door like a rag doll. Mark carried her to the porch, which should have been my first warning because she always walked herself in, always ran to give me a hug. He said she'd been tired all day, probably just needed sleep. But the moment I took her in my arms, I knew this was different. She had vomited in the car. I could see the stain on her shirt, and her skin was clammy and cold despite the summer heat. Her lips had a faint blue tinge that terrified me. I didn't even say goodbye to Mark. I just carried her straight to my car and drove to the emergency room, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. The ER was crowded, full of people with broken bones and crying babies and elderly folks clutching their chests. But the moment the triage nurse saw Emily's condition, they took us back immediately. The doctors thought it might be food poisoning at first, but when they ran tests, her blood work was clean. No bacteria, no viruses, no toxins that their standard panels could detect. Her white blood cell count was normal. Her electrolytes were only slightly off. Nothing that explained why she looked like she was dying. One of the nurses, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun, looked at me as they were monitoring Emily's vitals. She said gently, almost conspiratorially, "Sometimes it's not about what's in the blood. It's about what's around them, their environment, the people they're with, the things they're exposed to." She didn't say anything else, just squeezed my shoulder and walked away, but that sentence echoed in my head for days afterward, bouncing around like it was trying to find a place to land. I started noticing smaller things after that, details I had ignored before or written off as insignificant. Every time Emily went to her dad's house, he would send me a picture or two of them together, Mark and Emily smiling at the camera, sitting at a restaurant, or playing in the yard. At first I'd thought it was sweet, a way of showing me she was fine. But looking back through my phone at all those photos, I realized they all looked staged. The smiles were too perfect, too posed. And Emily's smile never quite reached her eyes. She always looked tired, worn out, like she was performing happiness rather than feeling it. Then one Friday morning in late July, as Emily was packing her overnight bag for another weekend with her father, she looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said quietly, so quietly I almost missed it, "Daddy says I shouldn't tell you things." My heart dropped into my stomach. I knelt down to her level, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was panicking inside. I asked her what she meant, what kinds of things. She just shrugged, her little shoulders rising and falling, and said, "Things that happen at his house. He says it makes you mad, and it's not nice to make Mommy mad." That night, after she went to sleep, after I'd read her 3 stories and sang her favorite lullaby, and watched her eyelids finally flutter closed, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall until the sun came up. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and I could no longer pretend otherwise. I tried a new approach the following week. I started sending Emily to Mark's house with her own meals, small containers of food I'd prepared and labeled for each day of the weekend. Homemade chicken nuggets, pasta with butter, apple slices, crackers, and cheese. Things I knew she liked and I knew were safe. I wrote her name on each container and added little notes for Saturday lunch or Sunday breakfast. When she came back sick again, that weekend fever, nausea, that same glassy look in her eyes, I checked the containers. All of them were untouched, every single one. The food was exactly as I'd packed it, the seals unbroken. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't feeding her what I sent. He was giving her something else entirely. I called him Monday morning, as soon as I dropped Emily off at school. My hands were shaking as I dialed, but my voice came out steady. I asked him directly why Emily hadn't eaten any of the food I'd packed. He was quiet for a moment, then said curtly that she didn't want it, that she preferred what he made for her. His tone was sharp, defensive in a way that made my skin prickle. When I pressed him, asked him what exactly he was feeding her, he got angry. He accused me of trying to control his household, of not trusting him to take care of his own daughter. He said I was being paranoid and controlling, the same words he'd used during our marriage whenever I questioned anything. I hung up shaking, my whole body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage, realizing how impossible it would be to reason with him. I started paying closer attention to patterns in her symptoms, writing everything down with dates and times. It wasn't just random sickness anymore. The symptoms seemed to flare up more severely after specific weekends, ones where he'd taken her somewhere other than his house. I only knew this because sometimes Emily would mention small details in passing, fragments of information she'd let slip. We went to Daddy's friend's place. Or we played in the workshop. Mark worked part-time as a mechanic, helping a friend of his who owned an auto body shop. That explained the smell of gasoline on her clothes, the lingering scent of motor oil and exhaust, but it didn't explain the sickness. It didn't explain the bruises or the chemical burns or the way her eyes looked hollow and distant. I began researching online late at night, falling down rabbit holes of medical websites and toxicology articles. I learned about chemical exposure in children, things like solvents, industrial cleaners, paints, and thinners. I learned that prolonged exposure, even in small amounts, could cause symptoms like Emily's: nausea, headaches, rashes, fatigue, confusion, difficulty concentrating. The idea that my daughter might be breathing in toxic fumes or touching harmful substances made my stomach twist into knots. I imagined her small hands touching contaminated surfaces, her lungs filling with poisoned air, her body trying desperately to process toxins it was never meant to encounter. But then another thought crept in, dark and insidious, one I tried to push away but couldn't. What if it wasn't accidental? What if this wasn't about carelessness or negligence? It sounded crazy, even to me, the kind of thing you'd see in a movie, not real life. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that Mark was doing this on purpose, that there was intent behind Emily's suffering. I didn't know why yet, couldn't piece together a motive that made sense, but I knew how manipulative he could be. I'd lived with it for years. He liked control, craved it like some people crave air. He needed to feel superior, to be the one in charge. He always found ways to make me feel like I was failing as a mother, small comments about how Emily seemed happier with him, how she never got sick at his house, which was a lie, I realize now, how I coddled her too much or didn't discipline her enough. What if this was another way to hurt me through her? What if he was making her sick deliberately to make me look incompetent, to build a case for getting full custody? The idea made me physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, my body rejecting the thought as much as my mind struggled with it. But once that possibility took root, I couldn't shake it. It grew like a weed, spreading through every other thought I had. One Friday morning in early August, as I watched Emily climb into Mark's truck with her little backpack and her stuffed rabbit, I felt a wave of dread so powerful it nearly knocked me over. I smiled and waved, put on the performance of a cooperative co-parent, but inside I was screaming. Inside I was terrified. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling, my thoughts circling endlessly back to that nurse's words. It's about what's around them. So the next weekend I did something I never thought I'd do, something that felt like crossing a line but also felt absolutely necessary. I bought a small GPS tracker online, one of those tiny devices designed for tracking keys or wallets. It was barely the size of a coin, unobtrusive and nearly weightless. I slipped it into the lining of Emily's pink backpack, tucking it into a small tear in the fabric where it wouldn't be noticed. I told myself it was for her safety, that I needed to know where she was in case of emergency. But really, I was looking for the truth. I was looking for proof. When Mark picked her up that Friday, I watched the little dot on my phone's tracking app as they drove away. They went straight to his house, just like always. Everything looked normal at first. The dot stayed stationary at his address for the rest of Friday evening and all day Saturday. But then Saturday afternoon, around 2 p.m., I saw the dot begin to move. They were leaving. I watched, my heart pounding, as the tracker showed them driving east, away from town, toward an area I didn't recognize. They drove for maybe 20 minutes before stopping at a location near an old industrial park on the outskirts of the county. I zoomed in on the map, trying to figure out what was there. It wasn't a park. It wasn't a restaurant or a shopping center or any kind of recreational area. Just empty lots and old warehouses, structures that looked abandoned on the satellite view, surrounded by dead grass and dirt roads. They stayed there for hours. 4 hours. From 2 p.m. until almost 6 p.m. That little dot didn't move. I stared at my phone until my eyes burned, trying to understand. Why would he take her there? What could possibly be in that industrial area that would justify spending an entire Saturday afternoon there with an 8-year-old child? When Emily came home on Sunday night, she was sick again. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused, like she was looking through me rather than at me. She complained that her throat hurt, that swallowing was painful. I took her temperature. It was 102.3 degrees. Her skin smelled faintly metallic again, that chemical scent I'd noticed before, but stronger now, more pronounced. I took photos of her with my phone, documenting her condition, the pallor of her skin, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her water glass. I wrote everything down in my notebook. Times, symptoms, observations. The pediatrician's office was closed on Sunday, but I called the after-hours nurse line. They said to monitor her, give her fluids, bring her in Monday morning if she wasn't better. But I knew what they'd say, the same thing they always said. Her tests would come back normal. They'd blame stress or suggest she was just prone to getting sick. I sat beside Emily's bed that night, stroking her hair, whispering that she was safe now, that everything would be okay. But I didn't believe my own words. As I tucked her in, as I adjusted her blanket and made sure her favorite stuffed rabbit was within reach, she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Daddy made me drink something today," she said, her voice small and tired. "He said it was for my health, to make me strong." My hands went completely numb. I had to force myself to keep breathing, to stay calm so I wouldn't scare her. I asked her what it was, trying to keep my voice level and curious rather than panicked. She said she didn't know, just that it tasted bad, like medicine but worse, and that it made her stomach hurt afterward. She said Daddy told her she had to drink all of it or she couldn't have dessert later. I kissed her forehead, told her to rest, and walked out of the room on legs that barely held me. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and tried not to hyperventilate. He was giving her something that made her sick. And he was doing it deliberately, making it conditional, tying it to rewards and punishments. That was the moment I decided I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't keep gathering information and hoping things would become clearer. I couldn't risk another weekend, another dose of whatever he was giving her. Now, this is where I need you to listen carefully and tell me if I was right or wrong in my actions. Because what I did next was risky, possibly illegal depending on how you look at it, and it set in motion a chain of events that destroyed relationships I thought were unbreakable. I took a huge risk and started my own investigation, diving deeper than I'd ever gone before. I had no idea where it would lead, but I knew I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. I want to know if you think I went too far in my desperation to save my child, or if you would have done the same thing. Because the next step I took changed everything, and it led me straight to the truth about what her father had really been doing to our daughter. When I made the decision to start investigating what was really happening to Emily during those weekend visits, I didn't know where to begin. I wasn't a detective or a private investigator. I had no training in surveillance or evidence gathering. I was just a mother running on pure instinct and paralyzing fear, fueled by caffeine and the kind of determination that only comes when your child's life might be at stake. But that fear, as consuming as it was, turned out to be enough to push me past every ethical line I thought I'd never cross, every boundary I'd set for myself about privacy and trust. That next week felt impossibly long. Every day at work, I was managing a small accounting office downtown. I struggled to focus. Numbers on spreadsheets blurred together. I'd catch myself staring at my computer screen for 20 minutes without processing a single piece of information. My coworkers noticed. My boss, a kind woman named Patricia, pulled me aside Thursday afternoon and asked if everything was okay at home. I lied and said I was fine, just not sleeping well. She didn't push, but her concerned expression stayed with me. I spent every free minute I had going through what little information I could find about Mark's life. I scrolled through his social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, even his LinkedIn profile. I was looking for anything suspicious, any hint about where he'd been or what he'd been doing. But there wasn't much to find. He didn't post often, maybe once every few weeks, and when he did, it was always carefully curated. Pictures of him and Emily smiling together, captions about quality father-daughter time and blessed to have this little girl. Each post had dozens of likes and supportive comments from mutual friends and family members. Such a great dad, and she's lucky to have you. Reading those comments made my skin crawl. Everyone saw the facade, the performance he put on for the world. Nobody saw what I was seeing. It made me furious. The more he tried to look perfect online, the more I felt certain he was hiding something terrible. I remembered that old industrial park I'd seen on the GPS tracker, so one afternoon after work, I decided to drive there myself. I told Emily I had to run an errand and dropped her at my neighbor's house, Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who was always happy to watch her for an hour or two. Then I drove east out of town, following the same route the tracker had shown me. It took about 25 minutes to get there. The area was exactly as desolate as it had looked on the map, maybe even more so in person. Most of the buildings were abandoned warehouses and storage facilities, their metal siding rusted and covered in graffiti. Weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt parking lots. Chain-link fences sagged and leaned at odd angles, their gates hanging open or missing entirely. A few of the structures had no trespassing signs, but they were faded and ignored, clearly unenforced. I parked my car down the road, trying to look like I might be lost, rather than deliberately surveilling the area, and just watched for a while. Nothing happened. No cars drove by. No people appeared. The air smelled like oil and iron and decay. The silence was heavy, oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of trucks passing on the highway a mile or two away. I sat there for maybe 45 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to imagine my daughter in this place. The image that formed in my mind made my chest tight with panic. Emily standing in this emptiness, small and vulnerable, surrounded by rust and abandonment. When I drove home, I felt more unsettled than before I'd gone. The visit had answered no questions, only created more. That night, after Emily went to bed, I made a decision that I knew might drain what little savings I had left. I searched online for private investigators in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, reading reviews and checking credentials. I found one who specialized in family and custody cases, a woman named Karen Holloway. Her website showed a photo of a professional-looking woman in her 40s with short, dark hair and serious eyes. The testimonials were good, people thanking her for helping them uncover abuse and protect their children. Her rates weren't cheap, $150 an hour plus expenses, but I figured I could make it work somehow. I'd cut back on everything else, eat ramen for a month, skip my own doctor's appointments if I had to. The next morning, Friday, I called her office and left a message explaining that I suspected my ex-husband was putting my daughter in danger during custody visits, and I needed help gathering evidence. I tried to sound calm and rational rather than hysterical, even though inside I was screaming. She called me back within 2 hours. Her voice was direct but kind. She asked me to explain the situation from the beginning, to walk her through everything I'd observed. I told her about the pattern of weekend sickness, the unexplained symptoms, the doctors who couldn't find anything wrong, the GPS tracker, the industrial area, Emily's mention of being forced to drink something. I told her about the chemical smells and the bruises and the way my daughter seemed to disappear into herself whenever she came home from her father's house. Karen listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "I believe you, and I think we need to move quickly." We met later that afternoon in her office, a small suite in a building near downtown Dallas. The office was neat but sparse, a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a few framed licenses and certifications on the wall. I remember sitting across from her, my hands clasped tightly together to keep them from shaking, trying not to cry. She asked more detailed questions. When exactly did the sickness start? How often did it happen? What specific evidence did I have? I showed her the notebook I'd been keeping. Dozens of pages filled with dates, symptoms, observations, written in my increasingly frantic handwriting. I showed her the photos on my phone of Emily's rashes and bruises, the screenshots of the GPS tracking data showing the trips to the industrial park. She studied them all carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious. "This is enough to start with," she said. "I'm going to follow him over the next few weekends, see where he goes, what he does, who he meets with. I'll document everything, photos, video, logs, but you need to do something for me." "Anything," I said immediately. "Don't confront him. No matter what you suspect, no matter how angry or scared you get, do not confront him directly. If he knows we're investigating, he'll change his behavior, cover his tracks. We need him to think everything is normal." I nodded, even though the idea of pretending everything was fine felt impossible. But I trusted her. She'd done this before. She knew what she was doing. She also advised me to document everything on my end, keep Emily's medical records organized, photograph any symptoms immediately when she came home, save any text messages or emails. Mark sent me, "Keep that notebook updated. Build the strongest case possible," she said, "because when this goes to court, they're going to question everything." That word court sent a chill through me. I hadn't fully processed that this might end up in legal proceedings, that there might be judges and lawyers and testimonies. But of course that's where this was headed. I was essentially accusing the father of my child of deliberately poisoning her. That wasn't something that would be resolved through conversation. Waiting through that next week was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every day felt like it lasted 40 hours. I went through the motions of normal life, work, dinner, homework help, bedtime stories, but inside I was counting down to Friday, simultaneously dreading it and needing it to arrive so we could move forward. Every time I looked at Emily during those days, healthy and energetic and laughing at something on TV, I felt a terrible mix of relief and anxiety. She was okay now, in this moment. But how many more weekends could her little body take? Every time my phone buzzed during that week, I jumped, thinking it might be Karen with an update. But mostly it was just normal things, work emails, texts from friends, reminders about appointments. The first weekend of surveillance began on Friday evening when Mark picked Emily up. I hugged her a little too tightly, kissed her forehead a little too long. She looked at me curiously and asked if I was sad. I forced a smile and said, "No, of course not. I was just going to miss her." As I watched his truck pull away with my daughter inside, I felt physically ill. I texted Karen. "He just picked her up." She responded immediately, "On it." That weekend dragged by. I tried to distract myself, clean the house thoroughly, reorganize the kitchen cabinets, bake cookies I had no appetite to eat, watch movies I couldn't focus on. I checked my phone obsessively, looking at the GPS tracker, watching that little dot move around the city. Saturday afternoon, I saw them go to a park, then to a fast food restaurant. Nothing unusual. Karen texted me that evening. "Quiet day. Mostly stayed home. Will continue tomorrow." Sunday was more of the same. By the time Mark brought Emily home that evening, I was vibrating with nervous energy, but Emily seemed fine. Not great, not terrible, just tired like any kid would be after a busy weekend. She had a slight headache, she said, but nothing like the severe symptoms from previous weeks. I documented it anyway. Took her temperature. Normal. Looked for bruises or rashes. Noted the time and her general condition. Karen called me Monday morning. "The first weekend didn't give us much," she admitted, "but that's not unusual. He might not do whatever he's doing every single weekend. We need to be patient." Patient. That word felt impossible. The second weekend arrived. This time Karen was ready from the start, positioned near Mark's house before he even picked Emily up. She had better equipment this time too, a telephoto lens camera, audio recording devices, a second GPS tracker of her own that she planned to place on his vehicle if she got the chance. Friday night was quiet again, according to Karen's updates. But Saturday was different. I got a text from Karen at 1:47 p.m. They're on the move, heading east. My heart started racing. I knew where they were going. That industrial area. Another text at 2:23 p.m. Confirmed. Same location as your GPS showed. I'm parking at a distance. Will approach on foot with camera. I couldn't sit still. I paced my living room for what felt like hours, checking my phone every 30 seconds, even though I knew she wouldn't be able to update me frequently while she was surveilling. The waiting was agony. Finally, at 5:16 p.m., my phone rang. Karen's voice was tight with urgency when I answered. "I got photos," she said, "and you need to see them." "What did you see?" My voice came out strangled. "He's at some kind of workshop or shed in the back of the industrial complex. There's another man with him. I don't know who yet. I'll try to identify him. They have equipment set up. Looks like they're mixing or heating something. There are barrels, the kind used for chemicals, with warning labels on them. I couldn't get close enough to read what's on the labels without being spotted, but I got clear photos from a distance." "What about Emily?" My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Karen paused. "She's there. She's sitting on a folding chair near the shed entrance, wearing some kind of mask, looks too big for her face, probably an adult-sized respirator or dust mask. Your ex-husband was standing right beside her, holding a small bottle. It looked like he was showing it to her, maybe explaining something. At one point, I saw her reach out like she was going to touch it, but I couldn't see clearly enough to know if she actually did." The room spun around me. I had to sit down on the couch before my legs gave out. "He's exposing her to something," I whispered. "That's why she gets sick. He's bringing her to this place and exposing her to chemicals." "It looks that way," Karen agreed. "I'm going to try to get closer next weekend, maybe collect a sample if possible. But honestly, I think we might have enough already to call the police." "No." The word came out sharp, immediate. "Not yet. He'll just say she was never in any danger, that he had her wear a mask for protection, that he was being careful. He'll twist it. You know he will. We need more proof. Proof that he actually gave her something. Proof that it made her sick." Karen was quiet for a moment. "You're probably right. One more weekend then, but if I see him giving her anything to ingest, I'm intervening immediately. I'm not going to stand by and watch a child be poisoned. I understand, I said. Thank you. When Mark brought Emily home that Sunday evening, my stomach was in knots. She was pale and quiet, exactly as I'd expected. She complained of dizziness and said her stomach hurt. Her skin had that chemical smell again, not overwhelming, but definitely there when I hugged her, a faint, acrid scent clinging to her hair and clothes. I took photos of her pale face, noted the time and symptoms in my notebook, helped her change into clean pajamas, and put her straight to bed. I sat beside her bed for hours that night, watching her sleep, watching her small chest rise and fall, feeling simultaneously grateful that she was here and safe, and terrified of what might happen if I couldn't prove what Mark was doing. The week that followed was torture. Every interaction with Emily felt loaded with meaning and fear. When she coughed, I worried. When she said she was tired, I panicked. I found myself studying her face at breakfast, looking for signs of lasting damage, wondering what those chemical exposures might be doing to her developing body, her brain, her organs. I researched obsessively neurotoxicity in children, respiratory damage from industrial solvents, long-term effects of heavy metal exposure. Each article I read made my anxiety worse. I wanted to call Karen every day for updates, but I forced myself to wait, to be patient, to let her work. She was investigating Mark's friend, the man she'd seen at the industrial site. She ran his license plate through her contacts and identified him as someone named Derek Paulson, who had a history of code violations related to improper chemical storage and disposal. He'd been fined multiple times by the EPA for operating an unlicensed auto body and paint operation. Karen told me this over the phone on Wednesday, her voice grim. Your ex is associating with someone who clearly doesn't follow safety regulations, and he's bringing your daughter into that environment. When Friday came again, the third weekend of surveillance, I felt like I was sending Emily into a war zone. But I had no choice. If I refused to hand her over to Mark without a court order, I could be held in contempt. I could lose custody entirely. The system required me to keep sending her until I had undeniable proof of danger. I packed her bag with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I made sure she had her inhaler. She didn't have asthma, but I'd gotten one from the doctor just in case. Packed extra clothes. Put a note inside telling her I loved her. As she climbed into Mark's truck, she turned and waved at me, her small hand bright against the window. I waved back, smiling, even though tears were streaming down my face. Karen was in position by 1 p.m. She texted me updates throughout the day. At his house, watching, no movement yet. Then at 2:47 p.m., they're leaving, same direction, at 3:15 p.m. Confirmed at the industrial site again. I'm moving in closer this time. Have protective equipment ready in case I need to collect samples. The next few hours were silent. No texts, no calls. I sat on my couch staring at my phone, barely breathing, imagining 100 different scenarios, Karen getting caught, Mark realizing he was being followed, Emily getting hurt. My mind wouldn't stop spinning worst-case possibilities. Finally, at 6:33 p.m., my phone rang. I got everything, Karen said, and her voice had an edge to it I hadn't heard before, something between anger and vindication. Photos, video, and a sample. Tell me. I could barely form words. I watched him through the telephoto lens. He had Emily inside the shed this time, sitting on that same chair. He was wearing gloves and a proper respirator mask. She was wearing that too big mask again, the kind that doesn't seal properly on a child's face. He mixed something from 2 different containers. I got clear video of this into a smaller bottle. Then he added water from a jug. He shook it up, and then... She paused. Then he took off her mask and his mask, and he handed her the bottle and told her to drink it. My vision went dark around the edges. She drank it? About half of it. She made a face like it tasted bad. He said something I couldn't hear clearly, but it looked like he was encouraging her, maybe promising her something. She drank more, then stopped and said she felt sick. I could read her lips saying my tummy hurts. He took the bottle back, patted her head, and led her outside. Did you get all of this on video? Every second. Clear footage. You can see his face, see Emily's face, see the bottles and containers. After they left, I waited about 20 minutes. Then I went to the shed. He'd left the door unlocked. Probably because the whole area is so isolated, he doesn't think anyone would find it. I collected a sample from a container that matched one of the bottles he used. I wore gloves, used a sterile collection jar. It's all by the book. This sample will hold up if we need it for evidence. I could barely process what she was saying. The magnitude of it was overwhelming. He poisoned her. We watched him poison her. Yes, Karen said quietly. We did, and now we have proof. What do we do now? Now you wait for Emily to come home. Document her symptoms carefully, photos, written notes, everything. Then first thing Monday morning, we take everything to the police. And I mean everything: my investigation report, the photos, the video, the sample for lab testing, your medical records, your documentation. We build a case they can't ignore. When Mark brought Emily home that Sunday evening, I had to physically restrain myself from screaming at him, from attacking him, from calling the police right then and there. But I remembered Karen's advice. Stay calm. Don't tip him off. Let him think everything is normal. Emily could barely walk from his truck to the house. Her face was pale and clammy, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She was dizzy, she said, and her stomach hurt really bad. Mark barely looked at me as he handed over her backpack. She's been tired today, he said casually, like this was nothing unusual. Probably just needs rest. I took Emily inside, carried her to the couch, and held her while she curled up in a ball, whimpering softly. I took her temperature, 102.8 degrees. I took photos of her pale face, her trembling hands, the way she couldn't even hold her head up properly. I documented everything with timestamps. That night, her fever climbed even higher. I gave her children's fever reducer and watched it barely make a dent. She vomited twice, bringing up mostly clear liquid with a faint chemical smell. I sat beside her bed all night, stroking her hair, whispering that she was safe now, that no one would hurt her again. I kept thinking about that bottle, about what was in it, about what it might be doing to her small body. 3 days later, on Wednesday afternoon, Karen called with the lab results. I was at work but stepped outside immediately to take the call, my heart pounding. The sample tested positive for ethylene glycol, she said. That's antifreeze, mixed with water and possibly some kind of flavoring to mask the taste. The world tilted sideways. I actually had to lean against the building to stay upright. Antifreeze, I repeated numbly. The concentration wasn't high enough to be immediately lethal, Karen continued, her voice clinical now, professional, probably to keep her own emotions in check. But it was significant. Repeated ingestion of even small amounts causes exactly the symptoms Emily's been experiencing: nausea, headaches, dizziness, fever, confusion, metabolic disturbances. Over time, it causes kidney damage, neurological problems, if it had continued. She didn't finish the sentence. He was poisoning her, I whispered. The words felt surreal even as I said them. He was deliberately poisoning our daughter. Yes, the evidence is clear. We need to go to the police immediately today, if possible. I looked at my watch. It was 2:47 p.m. I'll leave work right now. Can you meet me at the police station? I'm already on my way there, she said. I'll wait for you. I went back inside, told my boss I had a family emergency and had to leave, grabbed my purse and drove straight to the police station in what felt like a fugue state. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember parking. I just remember walking into that building and seeing Karen waiting in the lobby with a large folder under her arm. We were taken to an interview room, a small space, with white walls, a table, and a few chairs. A detective named Ramirez joined us, a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. Karen laid out everything on the table: her investigation report, dozens of photos printed on glossy paper, a USB drive with the video footage, the lab report on official letterhead, my notebook filled with months of documentation, Emily's medical records showing repeated, unexplained illnesses. Detective Ramirez went through it all slowly, carefully. He watched the video 3 times, his expression growing harder each time. When he looked up at me, his eyes were filled with something between pity and anger. "This is one of the most disturbing cases I've seen," he said quietly. "Ma'am, I want you to know we're going to treat this with the utmost seriousness. I'm going to open an investigation immediately, and I'm calling Child Protective Services right now. Your daughter will be placed under your temporary sole custody until we can sort this out. What about Mark?" My voice sounded hollow, distant. "We'll need a warrant to search the industrial site and his home, which I'll petition for immediately. I don't think any judge will deny it given this evidence. We'll also need to interview Emily, which will be done by a trained forensic interviewer who specializes in children, and we'll be interviewing your ex-husband. Depending on what we find, he'll likely be arrested." The word arrested sent a shock through me. This was real. This was actually happening. "How long will all this take?" I asked. "The warrant should come through within 24 hours. We'll execute it immediately. If the evidence at the scene matches what you've shown me here, and I have no doubt it will, we'll bring him in for questioning. If he doesn't cooperate, we'll arrest him then." "If he does cooperate, we'll arrest him as soon as we have the physical evidence processed." I nodded, trying to absorb all of this. "Ma'am," Detective Ramirez said, leaning forward slightly, "I need to ask, does he know you've been investigating him?" "No," I said firmly. "I've been very careful. He thinks everything is normal." "Good. Keep it that way. Don't contact him. Don't give him any indication that anything has changed. If he suspects what's coming, he might destroy evidence or flee. Can you do that?" "Yes," though the idea of not confronting Mark, of not screaming at him about what he'd done, was almost unbearably difficult. "One more thing," the detective said. "I need you to prepare yourself for what comes next. This is going to get ugly. Your ex-husband will likely claim you fabricated everything, that you manipulated the evidence, that you've turned your daughter against him. His defense attorney will attack your character, your credibility, your motives. The process will be long and painful. But with evidence this solid, I'm confident we'll get justice." I left the police station in a daze. Karen walked me to my car, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You did the right thing. You saved your daughter's life." That night, I held Emily close as she slept, tears streaming down my face. I had finally done it. I had taken the step necessary to protect her. But I knew Detective Ramirez was right. This wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The next 48 hours felt like living in suspended animation. I went to work, came home, made dinner, helped Emily with homework, gave her baths, read her stories, all the normal routines of motherhood. But underneath it all was a current of fear and anticipation that never stopped humming. Thursday evening, Detective Ramirez called. "We executed the search warrant this afternoon," he said. "We found the shed at the industrial site, exactly where your investigator said it would be. Inside, we found multiple containers of ethylene glycol, mixing equipment, bottles matching the ones in the video, and chemical residue everywhere. We collected samples, took photographs, documented everything. The scene matches your evidence perfectly." "And Mark?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We brought him in for questioning an hour ago. He's claiming innocence, says he was just helping his friend Derek with some mechanical work, that Emily was never in danger, that she only visited the site once or twice and never went inside. But we showed him the video. He went quiet after that. His attorney arrived and advised him not to say anything more. Are you arresting him? Yes. He's being charged with child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and unlawful administration of a harmful substance. The DA might add more charges as the investigation continues. He'll be arraigned tomorrow. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just sat in Emily's room, watching her breathe, thinking about how close we'd come to losing her. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't investigated, if I hadn't been willing to cross ethical lines and hire a private investigator and document everything obsessively, where would we be now? How much worse could Emily's health have become? Would she have suffered permanent kidney damage? Brain damage? Would I have lost her entirely? The thought made me physically ill. Friday morning, Emily asked why she wasn't going to Daddy's house that weekend. I knelt down to her level, looked into those innocent brown eyes, and said gently, "Daddy's not feeling well right now, sweetie. You'll stay with me for a while." She accepted this without question, just shrugged and went back to coloring. The news broke that evening. Local news stations ran the story. Father arrested for allegedly poisoning daughter during custody visits. Our names weren't used. Emily was a minor. And I'd requested privacy, but in our small community, people figured it out quickly. My phone exploded with calls and texts. Some were supportive friends expressing shock and offering help, but many were accusatory. Mark's parents called, screaming that I'd destroyed their son's life with lies. Mark's sister sent me a text calling me a vindictive bitch who couldn't let go of the past. Even some of my own family members questioned whether I'd overreacted, whether there might be some misunderstanding. My mother called crying. "Are you sure?" she kept asking. "Are you absolutely sure he would do something like this?" "Mom, there's video," I said flatly. "Video of him mixing antifreeze in water and making Emily drink it. There's lab evidence. There's months of medical documentation. Yes, I'm sure." She went quiet. Then, softly, "I just can't believe it. He always seemed like such a good father." That hurt worse than the accusations. The implication that I might have been wrong, that maybe I'd misunderstood, that nice people don't do terrible things, it cut deep. I stopped answering my phone after that. Let them think what they wanted. I knew the truth. More importantly, the police and the DA knew the truth. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, CPS conducted their own investigation, interviewing me, Emily, Emily's teachers, her doctor, our neighbors. They reviewed all the evidence. Their report concluded that Emily had been subjected to severe and ongoing abuse and recommended that Mark's parental rights be terminated and that he face criminal prosecution. Emily started therapy with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. The first few sessions were hard. Emily didn't understand why she couldn't see her daddy, why everyone was asking her strange questions, why her life had suddenly changed so dramatically. But slowly, over weeks, she began to open up. She talked about feeling sick at Daddy's house. She talked about the bad medicine he made her drink. She talked about feeling scared but not knowing why. Hearing these things secondhand from her therapist broke my heart all over again. The preliminary hearing arrived. I sat in the courtroom wearing my best professional clothes, my hands folded in my lap to hide their shaking. Mark sat at the defense table in a suit, looking smaller than I remembered, defeated in a way I'd never seen before. Our eyes met once across the courtroom, and what I saw there wasn't remorse or guilt. It was cold, hard resentment, blame. Even now, facing criminal charges, he blamed me. The prosecution presented their case. The video footage, the lab results, the medical records, Karen's testimony, Detective Ramirez's findings from the search warrant. It was overwhelming, undeniable. The defense attorney tried to create doubt, suggested that the video was taken out of context, that the substance in the bottle might not have been what we claimed, that Emily's illnesses might have been coincidental. But the judge wasn't buying it. "There is sufficient evidence to proceed to trial," the judge said gravely. "The defendant will remain in custody. Bail is denied given the nature of the charges and the potential danger to the child." Mark was led out in handcuffs. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no vindication, just a hollow emptiness where all those months of fear had lived. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting again. I'd prepared a brief statement with my lawyer. I'm grateful that the legal system is taking this matter seriously. My only concern has been and continues to be my daughter's safety and well-being. We ask for privacy as we heal from this traumatic experience. The questions they shouted as I walked to my car were invasive, cruel. "Did you suspect earlier? Why did you keep sending her to his house? Do you feel guilty?" I didn't answer any of them. I just got in my car and drove home to Emily, who was waiting with Mrs. Chen. The trial was set for 3 months later. Those months were a strange mix of healing and dread. Emily's health improved dramatically. No more weekend illnesses, no more mysterious symptoms. The color returned to her cheeks permanently. Her energy came back. She laughed more, played more, started being a kid again instead of a patient. But the shadow of the upcoming trial hung over everything. I knew I'd have to testify. I knew Emily might have to testify, though the DA was trying to avoid putting her through that trauma. I knew every detail of our lives would be examined, questioned, picked apart. People in town chose sides. Some stood by me, understanding that I'd done what any mother would do to protect her child. Others believed Mark's family's version of events, that I was a vengeful ex-wife who'd fabricated an elaborate scheme to destroy him. Old friends stopped calling. Invitations to social events dried up. Parents at Emily's school whispered when I came to pick her up. But Emily was safe. And that was all that mattered. The trial, when it finally came, was exactly as brutal as I'd been warned. The defense painted me as obsessive, controlling, unable to accept the end of my marriage. They brought up arguments Mark and I had had during our divorce, twisted my words, made my protective instincts sound like paranoia. They tried to suggest that I'd coached Emily, that I'd manipulated the evidence, that I'd conspired with Karen to frame an innocent man. But the evidence spoke louder than their theories. The video was damning. You could clearly see Mark mixing chemicals and giving the mixture to Emily. The lab reports were conclusive. The medical records showed an undeniable pattern. Expert witnesses testified about antifreeze poisoning, about the symptoms it causes, about how Emily's medical history matched that profile perfectly. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand on shaking legs. The prosecutor asked me to walk through everything from the first weekend Emily got sick to the moment I hired Karen to investigate. I spoke for almost 2 hours, my voice steady, even though inside I was breaking apart all over again. The defense attorney cross-examined me aggressively. "Isn't it true that you wanted full custody? Isn't it true that you resented your ex-husband? Isn't it true that you'd do anything to keep him away from your daughter?" "Yes," I answered to that last question. "I would do anything to protect my daughter from someone who was poisoning her. That's what mothers do." The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, I finally let myself cry. Mark was sentenced to 12 years in prison. 12 years for systematically poisoning his own daughter to make me look like an incompetent mother, to build a custody case against me, to satisfy his need for control. It didn't feel like enough. It would never feel like enough. But it was something. Now here we are. 2 years have passed since that sentencing. Emily is 10 years old now, healthy and bright, and starting to leave those dark months behind. She still has nightmares sometimes. She still gets anxious around men who remind her of her father. But she's healing, slowly and steadily. As for me, I'm still picking up the pieces. My relationship with my parents is strained, but slowly improving. They finally accepted the truth of what Mark did, though we don't talk about it much. My sister and I haven't spoken since the trial. Mark's entire family has cut off all contact, painting me as the villain who destroyed their beloved son and brother. Extended family gatherings are awkward at best, non-existent at worst. But I can live with that. Because every night when I tuck Emily into bed and see the peace on her face, when I watch her run and play without getting mysteriously ill, when I hear her laugh freely without that underlying note of fear, I know I made the right choice. I exposed a monster who happened to be her father. I destroyed a family to save a child, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. So I'm asking you now, after hearing this entire story, was I right or wrong? Did I do the right thing by investigating my ex-husband, by hiring a private investigator, by gathering evidence secretly and turning him in to the authorities? Or should I have tried harder to believe he was innocent, to find another explanation, to keep our family intact at any cost? Because that decision didn't just end his freedom, it cost me relationships I thought were permanent, turned people I loved against me, and left scars that may never fully heal. But it saved my daughter's life. And in the end, isn't that what matters most? Please, tell me what you think. Because even now, even knowing what I know, even seeing Emily healthy and safe, there are still nights when I lie awake, wondering if there was another way, a better way, a way that wouldn't have torn everything apart. But then morning comes, and Emily bounces into my room with that bright smile, asking what's for breakfast, excited about her day, and I remember why I did it. I did it for her, and I always will.